put the minutes for the 5th of June 2019 for your consideration. Have members seen the minutes? Can I put the minutes to you page by page if you have any corrections? Page 1 and 2. Page 3. Page 4. 430 Jan. At the bottom of page 4, Mr. Judge. Okay. We are. It's our page 5 corrected. Anything else on page 5? Nothing. We are on page 6. Page 7. Thank you. But for the correction on page 5, the minutes do reflect what we considered on the 5th of June. Can I have a hand adopting? Mediproto seconds. We move quickly to matters arising. Is there any matter arising on our members?
Madam Speaker, on page 2, point 4.3, we would like to propose that the order for member statements be aligned to the one for sequence in respect of sequence for questions, because with member statements, the FF plus comes after group 1, which comprises smaller parties, and yet for questions it comes before after IFP, and we think that it is correct that FF plus should come after IFP in terms of the party strength. And therefore, with the agreement of this meeting, we would like to request that that order be aligned. That will apply also to the order for motions and parties. It's just a minor adjustment to reflect the party strength.
We are agreed. Agreed. There is no other matter arising. Can we then move on to item number 5? The procedure for removal.
Madam Speaker, honorable members, we have circulated discussion document, for lack of a better title. And this relates to the procedure for removal of office bearers of institutions supporting democracy. And in point 1 of the document, we highlight the grounds for removal of office bearers, which is the ground of misconduct, capacity, competence, the finding of that effect by a committee of the NA, and adoption of a resolution calling for the removal. And therefore, the document is dealing with all Chapter 9 institutions. And point 3 of the document, we are proposing that consideration be given to 4 stages, proposed 4 stages that should be considered when these rules are drafted or the procedures are drafted. And we want to propose that the committee at the right time should consider agreeing to one procedure, being that of a motion, a substantive motion. And the second point that we propose should be considered is the preliminary assessment of evidence. And the reason why we raise this is because in terms of Rule 88, I think that responsibility is with the Speaker of 88 says no member may reflect upon the competency or integrity of a judge of a superior court, the holder of a public office in a state institution supporting constitutional democracy, referred to in section 194 of the Constitution, or any other holder of office other than a member of government whose removal from such office is dependent upon the decision of the House, except upon a substantive motion in the House presenting clearly formulated and properly substantiated charges, which, if true, would, in the opinion of a speaker, prima facie warrant such a decision. So the rule as it stands at the moment says that the speaker who must make that assessment. We will be aware that with respect of rules that relate to section 89 of the Constitution, that responsibility has been given to a panel to make the assessment. And therefore we think that there needs to be a decision on how you deal with that stage. And point 5 of the document speaks to the role of the speaker and then the role of the committee. In other words, once a motion is submitted, should it go to a committee, should it go to a panel, and later on will indicate that Honorable Steenhuisen has also made a submission along this route. In the case of the president, for instance, where there is a panel, case of a president, where there is a panel report, that report goes to the speaker and through the speaker to the House. It is envisaged that the House will pronounce itself on the preliminary report of the panel before the rest of the process is undertaken. Now, the risk that you run there is that the House can decide either way. No one can dictate how the House should decide. The panel could conceivably say there is a basis to proceed with the process, and the House could, in its own wisdom, say we don't agree with this, we don't think there's a basis. So that must be considered. So in relation to section 89, the report goes to the House. Now, in relation to this process, we would advise that where there is a panel and there is that preliminary assessment, whether by a panel or by a committee, it should still be reported to the House. It could be reported for information, so that the House is aware that we are now moving to the next stage of the process. We've gone beyond the preliminary stage. Then point 6 gives options of what mechanism will be used once you've gone through that preliminary stage, whether you would have a special committee on section 194 of the Constitution, which could be constituted as and when there is a matter to be considered, or you would go the route of an ad hoc committee which would consider these motions, or as it is the case currently, the matter is referred to a relevant portfolio, which in this case is a portfolio committee on justice. And we are then saying that the other issue that would have to be dealt with is relates to legal representation of the person concerned. And point 7 says, importantly, any such determination should be made without undue delay, given the consequences of the action against an office bearer and the implications for the institution they serve. Madam Speaker, that is what we would like to bring to the attention of this committee, and also indicate, as I intimated earlier, that Honorable Steenhuisen has also made a submission proposing procedures that the committee should consider on this matter.
Members, we are open for comments. That is the name.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, and thanks to Mr. Klosso for the background and the discussion document. I think much of what has been discussed is encapsulated in the proposal which I've placed before the committee as a starting point for us to start some form of consideration. I think I'd like to start off by saying that why I think there needs to be a process is that the removal of a head of a Chapter 9, in a particular instance the public protector, should not be a process that's entered into life. That's particularly given the history of this particular office in South Africa. And from time to time, that office will make rulings, findings, consequences that will have serious impact on government and could
Good
well
morning again,
be negative for government.
honorable
And
members.
so it shouldn't be easy to simply by a majority vote remove the public protector from office, because it is a double-edged sword. A malevolent government, I'm not saying this one is, I'm saying a malevolent government could use the procedure to remove a public protector who's actually doing their job in terms of the Constitution. But equally so, the House must have, as the Constitution envisages, a process to determine when the head of the Chapter 9 institution behaves in a manner that constitutes one of the grounds in terms of the Constitution, needs to be a process that's continued to allow that person to answer the charges that are put to them and for allow a full and robust deliberation. That and a process that is a deliberative process with a number of safeguards and checks and balances to prevent the arbitrary use of a majority to simply remove somebody because you don't like the reports, and then also, on the other hand, to be able to remove somebody and move confidently as the National Assembly in terms of the set procedure, that at the end of the day is an unimpeachable process that is very difficult to be interdicted, indicted, or overturned by any form of application. So we've got to be fair, we've got to be seen to be fair, and I believe that the process which we have tabled as an initial follows very much on the lines of the removal of the President. We deliberated on extensively when we dealt with Section 89. Because like a President, to remove a President of office is also not something that should be entered into lightly. It's somebody who's been democratically elected, and if the grounds are met, then there has to be a process. And I think that we did extensive work as this committee in the Fifth Parliament in evolving that process. And again, much like that process, this is uncharted territory for us. This is not something we've had to deal with before, and I think it's a natural evolution of the rules. So I know there's some commentators who've been very critical of Parliament that we didn't have a process in place already, and I think it's unfair and misplaced criticism, because the rules, like constitutions, like these documents, are living documents, and that they evolve over time to meet the circumstances and requirements. The rules today, as they exist in the 9th iteration, are very different to the rules that exist in the 1st iteration. It's a natural process, so I don't think there's any negativity that should be directed in Parliament's direction that it didn't have rules. We've recognised that this is a lacuna, and before we embark upon such processes in the future, to make sure that the legislature is not compromised in the work that it does, that it's able to do so. So the rules that we've placed before you today, we believe, are comprehensive, that they pass muster in terms of what's required. Obviously, we would like them to be used as a starting point for some form of discussion about how we proceed. But what I really don't be really quite concerned about is if we're sitting here 3, 4, 6 months later still deliberating. We have a problem. There is an issue in the Office of the Public Protector, the current incumbent, and what Parliament can't do is sit by while that process continues, while we argue for 6 months about the rules. So whatever we decide upon, I hope that we will move with the necessary speed that's required for us to deal with this current situation as it exists with the Office of the Public Protector in a fair, open and transparent manner, and in a way which is fair to all parties concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Paso, thanks for your presentation. As the ANC, we agree with the notion that we don't have the rules, and our constitution doesn't say anything about the process to remove, and our rules are not saying anything about the process to remove Chapter 9 institution. So we agree that we must establish those rules as the court ordered last time with regard to section section 89 of the Constitution. Honorable Speaker, just
committee, sorry, the other apology is from Honorable Juliet Mamarefani,
to the
who is
Constitution.
also
It can
not
be
in the
a
province.
retired judge or people with legal 3, people with legal minds. So from our side, we believe that if it's done that way, the process will be fair. The openness of the process and everything, we don't have a problem with that. It will be discussed. So because we want a fair process that will stand the test of time, and also we are not here to deal with only an incumbent or an individual, but it should be a process that will also be binding to other Chapter 9 institutions. So without wasting time, Honorable Speaker, that is what we propose as the ANC, and also to say that there's no need to waste time here deliberating on this matter, because we are still going to embark on that process in the subcommittee. Thank you.
Very much. Is there any other input?
Entity and utility will provide 95% more of the electricity supply in the country, and therefore it's quite crucial to the economy as a whole, and of course to citizens.
Stage 3C is required by committee.
Secondly, I think it's well known
I find that because I think that inquiry is going to be properly defined.
capture and a huge amount of
It's a subsequent
operational
outcome of something before.
damage
So
was done
we do need to have an inquiry on the
And thirdly,
fitness to hold
that we are,
office.
if
So
you like,
it's not just an open inquiry,
last
because
2 years or so,
removal is the end point.
in a period
There's a
of
step that
recovery
I find missing
from that damage.
here, and I think it
Will
fits
also
in that section of the inquiry.
governance
It's got to be further clarified. You must answer the question, it's an inquiry for what?
And as the President pointed out in several of
I
our
find it
papers,
missing because that is your starting point.
the question of President
Whether it's a substantive motion or
colleague
it's
Paul
something written,
said
the test point,
fairly early on
whether it's the
that many of the
president, it's the AG,
impact
it's the PP, is work
will not
must be
be
done
able
to
to
test whether this person is
meaning
fit to hold
they carry
office.
on
And if what we want to be very tight, I think we've got to tighten those issues, because the assumption
or,
that
in many cases given
you start a process with an end point of
Yes, in that
removal is
context,
supposed to have come through
then look
that
at
kind of test. So I
firstly,
thought I need
the effort
clarity
being
on
made by
that, because
government
it's not really
last year
spelled out here.
to
And
get
if we miss
firstly
that, it
governance
could be a very
governance
litigious issue that we get into.
the board that was appointed in January 2018.
Thank you very much, Honorable
There have
Speaker.
been management changes since then, and new management.
I think as ANC we want to be clear here that we're not discussing the nitty-gritties
Thirdly,
of
we've had any
removal or
number
not
of financial
removal.
issues, and
What we are agreeing
chair
to
has come to
is the
a
process.
policy
Should
to
there
how
be
we
an eventuality that at the end of the day,
But we can't deny the fact that
Chapter 9 person must be removed. But at the moment, we're not yet there. And we are just putting mechanism.
the liquidity challenge.
You have referred the matter to the
And as they will
Justice
explain to
Committee.
you,
The Justice
they will run
Committee
out of money
came back to
spend
you, Honorable
by the end
Speaker,
of October
to say
that
we are
not
unable to move forward because there are no clear mechanisms.
decisions that
As
government
Comrade
made. First is the
Honorable
things that
Judge
we've done
has
here,
said
for the first 3 years,
that
hopefully can be
even removal is the very
And secondly,
last part. There are certain processes that must come first.
last week,
That of having evidence base whether the person is fit or not fit to hold office. So I fully agree that let's allow these processes to unfold before we discuss the matter, and I hope Honorable Senators we are together on that, Mr. T. We are together on that we'll agree on the mechanism, put the process in place before we deal with the actual matter. And I don't want to get into that actual matter.
I think both of you are together on that one. Ntate Mgwezi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. In the document, the last page, there are no page numbers in the draft. So, but it's under general, number 1 and 2. I don't know whether we should put something like, after consideration of the report of the panel or something, then the National Assembly will make a final decision. Because when I'm reading number 2, it's like we must not open a chance for people to start interrogating whether the report by the panel is binding or is not. Therefore, must be implemented by Parliament or should not. So there should be somewhere something provided after consideration, where maybe could be debate or whatever, but after thorough consideration of the report, then Parliament will then make a final decision. So that we don't just give us reports and we take decisions before we interrogate the report.
This is the one decision that the National Assembly must exercise its constitutional rights. So we cannot, no panel and whatever, they simply
we know you
enable us and to ensure that the process is as open, as fair, as thorough as possible. We might also say that what this brings in is whether or not at the initial stages of identifying and interviewing candidates, we are doing what we should. Because I think if you are going to put the test of competency or non-competency at the end when you remove, you must also consider whether that test should not be put in the initial stage at all, so that your safety mechanism before even the first interview is a little bit more thorough. And on the first page, first input you made in the destinies, and you're right, the criticism against Parliament is actually firstly, it tells you where we were when we put up Chapter 9 institutions. We were a country that was looking at honorables, honor, service, honesty, all the good traits of a good leader. We were putting in the men and women of South Africa who were going to serve. The fact that it took us almost 25 years before we look at mechanisms to remove also tells you just how positive South Africa was about its capacity and its stance on good leadership.
Madam Speaker, and I concur with everything you've just said. I want to agree wholeheartedly with my right honourable friend Jane Cheese in the back, and that, yes, I do agree. Well, when you signed up to the A team, you've got to agree. To say that you're absolutely right, that there's got to be a number of steps. That's why we also propose that ab initio is an independent panel at this point of its duty. And that's to remove the political partisan pettiness that may arise from a
Thank you.
I was saying, feels aggrieved and wants somebody to take to remove. That panel made up of eminent persons appointed by the Speaker would then be a check and balance to make sure there's no petty politics and partisanship taking place in the process. After that, the NA will create a committee that
the little challenge
they've got to find at the first blush that they're one of those three thresholds met.
The presentation
I would just like to
shows on
agree with
all
you
the
once again. I will
screens when
obviously
you try
motivate these.
and enlarge
Perhaps we could have a meeting outside of us, because I can see the deputy chief is getting anxious and we're getting into the nitty-gritty. So I can bring you over to supporting particular aspects of the rules that I think we're in complete agreement with. just in terms of the chief of, I don't know where Mr. T comes from. I was always British, but obviously it's a new name. I'll have to chat to you afterwards, find out where that one comes from. But I hope it's from dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That's how we get a good parliament and make good rules. But to say that I agree with you wholeheartedly, this process has got to look dispassionately from an incumbent or a person, because these rules
what's the problem with Honorable Committee's
outlive us and outlive the current incumbent.
we have to use this thing.
I'm completely agreeing with you on that. But I am just flagging the fact that we do have a current crisis and we can't sit around and while we deliberate. So maybe that's the point I was making.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. We agree with everything that you have said. But just to assist all of us
Okay.
to this process.
Would you allow us to continue? Thank you so much. Okay, we're using the brief speak. Let's concentrate on them and let's get started.
With regard to the
Honorable
institution.
Honorable Pierre?
Then the second step will be by a motion, a substantive motion.
Chair, I think the team.
The third step will be the preliminary assessment of the evidence
Please don't fix the problem.
by an independent panel, because all of us will want that process to be fair, and also it will remove any partisan from the speaker. So that's why we propose the move to appoint a panel, and the panel deal with the assessment. But as Parliament, we must guard that panel not to enter into an inquiry. It will be about the assessment of evidence only. Then the last part, after the report of the panel, because the panel must report to the speaker. After reporting to the speaker, then the start of the inquiry,
What I would like to do
if there is a need. And we believe that Parliament do have the capacity through the portfolio committee to do that. So I thought we should just outline the process so that we are all on the same page. Thank you,
the 2015 special appropriation.
Thank you, Speaker. I think there's general agreement. We talk about the process,
state of
not
the
the
business
I think there's
today
Can
and the case for change,
if I say that,
and
there are three
explain
points I want to
briefly what makes
if we look at the
20.7 billion rand loss that we reported
maybe we should factor in the
March
the process
2019,
also for the
and
other independent
just restate the way we are approaching this with the
So that we
caveat that
consider
some of the details
I'm not going to mention
how
examples,
we
but
seek
if
to
we
address
do the
our
processes,
financial
we can just as well discuss that.
we
Secondly,
would want
the
to
Constitution
give
in
some highlights that
Section 1941 makes a distinction between the public protector, the Auditor General, and the member of any other commission. It distinguishes.
and then
So
our program
shouldn't
of
we also
how we
factor in
deal
this
with
distinction
one
look
of
at
our
the
bigger
process
challenges with this
of there will be a less of an
and,
implication for the independence
then move
of
on
the
to
other commissions than say the removal of the Auditor General.
the current
Should we factor in that distinction? And lastly, in section
The person,
1936,
can
it provides for the involvement of
within
civil
our
society in the appointment. So when we ask for a person to be removed in a process, shouldn't we also have a role for civil society in that process, even if it's just an opportunity?
So,
to make an
Chairperson, the historic part of
I think a lot of the issues that we
of
addressed,
23 billion.
all I needed to say was that a motion would have to comply with Section
here we
194A,
demonstrate the impact
which
that it
states
has
the
on the
grounds
financial ratio
removal.
from
Misconduct,
2015 to
incapacity, or
2016.
incompetence.
the various ratios
when
being the
the rule,
interest
I
cover,
imagine that the rules will say that the motion
the
must
gross
comply
debt to EBITDA ratio, the debt to equity
Madam Speaker, just to say that
ratio,
the
and
detail
the
that
debt
has
service
been
cover
raised here
ratio,
will
which
be captured in the rules,
improves
in the actual
from
rules,
0.8
once they
to
are
1.
adopted.
The stake for this is just a background of what happened to the 2015.
Madam Speaker, thank
The
you
current
very much.
situation
And I
that
appreciate
has
the
confined
inputs
itself
that
is
members
the
have made. But I would like to appeal
and these are the
that,
hallmarks of
however
an
complex
unsustainable
the process is, and
enterprise.
thorough we want to
The
be,
first one, our
but
debt
we must
situation
recognize the
is
necessity for certainty.
reaching
The
450
continuing,
billion. The cash that
uncertainty
we
about
generate
what's
from the
going to happen,
business,
whether
which
it's going
is
to happen,
from the
and if
EBITDA
it
line,
happens,
we are
what
not
the
able
outcome
to
is. It's
service
an
the
important
debt.
political
And we find ourselves having to
anxiety
borrow
that we must
to
fulfill.
pay
So I
debt.
really wish that the processes we
Through which
undertake must
Honorable
be at the pace of a village cow.
Peterson,
Can we
this
move faster?
it's not that
Speedier?
hard copy.
So that we
It's not from
village
the hard
cow,
copy.
so that
The
we
main
can move
elements of
with
it
speed
that are in there.
on
So
these matters.
it might
So
help while they are preparing
we don't
the
delay
hard copy,
unnecessarily. I'm just suggesting that
the presentation
can
I'm doing
we
is the one that's
give
on
this
the-
adequate time so that there's teams, the team that's going to attend to this.
I was making the point that we in a situation that we need to
noticing
borrow
the
money to
opportunities to
service
deal
debt.
with others as well. It can
Our
be
revenue
subsequently,
over the past
but there are others
10
that can
years,
prioritize nature.
increasingly so the last 5
Get
years,
done with them,
has actually
so
been
that
flat to
we
about
are
1%
Parliament
per
needs
year.
to be responsible.
The tariffs that
Overall
we
political
have
outside,
received
whatever
over the
your
period
is, but it just
has
desire
not
for
been
the public
cost
power
reflective, and
responsiveness. So the speed
I
in
will
which we
explain
is
this concept
important
the way
without,
we understand it.
being,
On the other
mistake
side,
because of
we have
untrue
also had a
haste,
ballooning
but it is necessary to
debt
do it.
that we are not
Thanks,
been able to
Madam
collect,
Speaker.
which
Can
is
we
now
agree one,
in total
you are
about
raising the issue of
38
speech,
billion rand.
speed,
And I will
and risk
explain what
insulting
goes
village
into that
girls
38
in the
billion rand.
process.
This
Ntate Korenhoff,
such that our cost,
yeah,
our
Ntate
operating cost in the
Korenhoff,
last 5 years
raises
have
another
increased
important
by
issue, whether or
30%,
not as a
reaching
real
151
because I
billion
believe
in
that
F19.
we are going to agree
The
that
big
we
driver
must
of our
refer
cost is
both these
people
drafts that we
related
have
costs
tabled
in coal
and
costs
the
and
one that comes from the Distinct Hazel to the
IPP costs,
subcommittee on the
IPP
review
payments
of the
that
rules of the Assembly.
we have
The issue of
pay.
can we hurry up
On the
this
operational
is also
side,
there. But in the
regrettably,
hurry up, can we
at the
make
back
sure
of an
that
aging plan,
we're very
an
thorough
aging
and
plan that has not been
process
maintained over
will,
time, our energy
will not
available
be faulted
factors
in
have
the end.
been dropping
Can I then
to
agree
late
with
60s
you that
to
we are referring this to the
definitely below 70.
subcommittee on the review?
And
Thank you
this
very
has
much.
exposed
If we are
plant's
agreed, we
ability
can then move on to our next
to
item.
provide
Which, honorable members, is the relocation of portfolio MDD and GCIS. Mr. Frolik?
Oh, good morning, Speaker. Good morning, honorable members. The item that I just want to put to the Rules Committee for consideration, Speaker, is for the Government Communication and Information System, GCIS, and the Media Development and Diversity Agency to report to the Portfolio Committee on Communications. As we are aware, after the recent general elections that we've had, the President gave the responsibility of these two entities, amongst other, to the Minister in the Presidency. And generally, the broad responsibilities of the Minister in the Presidency includes the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, the Planning Commission and Statistics South Africa, as well as these two entities. We think just for alignment, and we've done it in the 5th Parliament as well, is to request the Rules Committee to consider the proposal then for GCIS and the MDDA to report and to be overseen by the Portfolio Committee on Communications.
Are we agreed? Agreed. We move on to the next item. The consideration of the report of the subcommittee on physical removal of members from the chamber. Deputy Speaker, you have a report?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I hope members have received the report which you directed to us as a subcommittee to handle. We met and we considered the matter before us. We also watched the video clip as captured by Hansard, and the recommendations finally, which I think is the matter that we should go to directly, that was that firstly we satisfied ourselves that the presiding officer acted properly and appropriately in the circumstances, and that what we should look at is that incident demonstrated the necessity for changes that we are suggesting there. In addition to the main recommendation in my assessment is recommendation number 3, that the movement of the EFF members onto the floor space of the chamber to prevent the minister from delivering his speech and or to intimidate him constituted a breach of the Powers, Privileges and Immunities of Parliament and Provincial Legislature Act 2004, and that the Speaker should refer this matter to the Powers and Privileges Committee, as this amounts to a violation of parliamentary privilege. That, Madam Speaker, is the big one amongst the 6 recommendations. The others are cleaning up the rules, and we feel that the rules might be slightly weaker, that they must be strengthened, and that generally the technology must be sorted out as well to enable presiding officers to be able to act appropriately inside the chamber, and that the protection services team must wear uniform, that there is always a distinction that is easily, visibly, that can be made so that they are not dressed in a manner that might confuse them with members, and also, so that point is important there, and that that members, when removed, should be escorted, including large groups who have been removed from the chamber, off the precincts of Parliament in line with Assembly Rule 739. We thought that was missing because on inquiry we found that this did not happen, and it can create a problem. So that's the report, and in effect what we are requiring this meeting to do is for its referral to consider this activity. We confirm, as the rules required us to do, that the removal was appropriate in the circumstances. It followed a procedure, and there were sufficient grounds for the presiding officer to request the removal. And what happened subsequently is essentially out of order, and we are recommending what is in there. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Is the Chief Whip, Ndate Janchi?
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Let's welcome this report and the recommendation, especially recommendation 3, that the matter be referred to Powers and Privileges Committee. I don't want to dwell much on what happened that day, but really it was an embarrassment to us as Parliament. But I fully agree with item number 3. Thank you.
Chair, accept recommendation 3. I find the recommendations a bit too soft for what has happened. You always saying is that this must be done, this must. Here you have members who were named as they were doing this. They crossed the line. So 3, yes, it will attend, but there are limitations even to 3. So I felt that something more should have come here than the cleaning up of the rules, which is what this is basically saying, except point 3. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where every time something is done, it's about whether the rules were not clear or not. I mean, whether somebody wears a particular tag, that incident went beyond that. So maybe I'm underestimating what recommendation 3 is capable of doing. But we should condemn such, and the kind of actions we put in place must be congruent to such condemnation. And I'm just saying, I'm a bit, and maybe that's my learning curve, that the recommendations here are certainly not going as far as I thought they should. Thanks, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Well, obviously we are rejecting these recommendations with the contempt it deserve. On finding C, Chair, just a point of clarity. So what we are saying, we are charging these members with all of them with the same sort of fault. There's no, like, if you look at what Msani was doing or Sonti was doing, we are charging them as a group with the same charge, because then it's problematic on its own. It's problematic for us. And then on number 6, the Parliamentary Protection Services, well, we have seen them. They changed. Last time they brought police here that was not even part of the Parliamentary Police Service, and we were severely beaten up as women by men. So when you call in the Parliamentary Protection Service, you call them all in, men takes women up and beat them up on the Parliamentary Protection Service. Is that also allowed?
Thank you, Chairperson. Arising on recommendation number 1, it says there should be a review of the rules to ensure that the rules touch the pockets of members in circumstances such as the one referred to the subcommittee. I remember Dr. Melder making this suggestion, and I fully understand the logic behind it. But to touch the pockets of members could mean many things to different people. So I'm suggesting that it becomes more explicit what exactly we mean by that, touching the pockets. Maybe when a person passes next to you, you can just touch his pocket to make him or her aware that I'm seeing you. But in this particular case, we exactly know what it means. So maybe we could be more explicit with it, Comrade Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. I don't think we must over-egg this particular report, because it's not the role of this particular committee. And you'll remember that we got ourselves into some legal problems the last time we started to embark upon the process. The Powers and Privilege Committee, in terms of Chapter 4 of the Powers and Privileges Act, is empowered through a process to touch members on their pockets, and it's equivalent to 1 month's salary, and there's a variety of sanctions there. So it's very difficult for this subcommittee, outside of a framework of rules, to be able to impose those sanctions. What will have to happen is that this subcommittee, as it is rightly recommending, is saying that this report must go to the Powers and Privileges Committee. The Powers and Privileges Committee must examine the footage, they can take evidence, and they must make a decision whether, in fact, all or some of those members are guilty of contempt of Parliament. If they are guilty of contempt of Parliament, there's a number of sanctions in Chapter 4 of the Powers and Privileges Act that committee can then impose, that can touch members on their pockets, reprimand them, and take action. But it's not possible legally for either this committee or the subcommittee to impose that type of sanction on a member of Parliament. So all this committee report is doing is recommending to you, Speaker, that this report in its entirety and the incident be referred to the Powers and Privileges Committee to conduct that particular inquiry. That was my understanding of the work that we had to do, and which I think has been adequately discharged. As it relates to assault of people, I mean, I think we can get into the history around that as well, but I've also witnessed a female security officer being severely assaulted and kicked by members of Parliament, male members of Parliament, in the corridors of Parliament. But I mean, that's the 5th Parliament. We're in the 6th Parliament, and I think it's important that we establish the ground rules right up front so that we know what conduct is expected of us for the duration of this term.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I just want to draw the attention of the Rules Committee to recommendation 4, and that deals with the facilities available in these mini plenaries, Honourable Speaker. It lacks the basic facilities that is required to conduct a session of Parliament properly. This is a matter that has been raised since the 4th Parliament, and we have not seen any improvement in the facilities that's available in these different venues. And since we are going to start soon with mini plenaries, this is a matter that must be prioritized so that the presiding officers at least have some power to enforce discipline in these sittings.
Members, I therefore take it that we are agreeing to refer this to powers and privileges. That committee has been established. That committee will operate almost along, you forgive me, I'm not feeling so great this morning, along the lines that Ndate Steenhuisen was talking. So it is not the Rules Committee, no, that subcommittee that must actually pronounce on whether or not people are guilty of this or that. We will refer the matter, and we are hoping that with almost all parties of Parliament being represented there, that there will be openness, and that we will then leave it there and not prejudge the deliberations and whatever, the workings of that committee. That is the agreement that we are getting. It is unfortunate, ma'am, that you reject with contempt, because the offense committed that day was grievous. It doesn't happen in any parliament, and it cannot be left unchecked. So the matter will go to powers and privileges, and we await the report. It must not take time. I agree with you, Deputy Speaker. It must be dealt with as speedily as possible, so we can move on. If there is no further input, that is where we will, yes, that day, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. No, I just wanted to draw members' attention to the second paragraph after the, in the background, which essentially explains the exasperation that Comrade Honorable Janji is concerned about the weakness of our recommendation. We are confined. Ons is geknie halter, meneer. Ons kan nie verder gaan nie. There are, so that places that confines. The job will be done by you in your other capacity in the other committee.
He did accept that he
Thank
is
you very much.
on a learning curve.
Well, I'm not quite
So that is where the matter will go. We will move on to item number 8, the review of the sub judice rule.
Madam Speaker, this relates to a challenge to the application of the sub judice rule when the Deputy President appeared before the House for questions. And the position taken by the House or by the Speaker was that the matter would have to be considered, and the essence of this is whether the sub judice rule is still applicable or should still be applicable, or the manner it is being applied currently is correct. We would therefore recommend that this matter be referred to the subcommittee on the review of rules, for that committee to look at the principle of the sub judice rule and come back to this committee with a recommendation. Thanks.
Are we agreed?
I'm in agreement, but I would just like in the interim then to go, what governs in the House is that the precedent and practice that was adopted previously is continued, and that's contained in the ruling. I think it was the Chinwala ruling, where it was agreed that it would be applied in the narrowest sense possible, so as to prevent the shielding of debate, etc. But while we're deliberating.
You are saying we must go back to the Chinwala ruling and do the narrowest interpretation of the rule. We can do that in the interim, but that means that the subcommittee must prioritize this rule because even in the narrowest way, some of us, our understanding and interpretations are different. And that is why the review would really help us to really clarify in the simplest of languages that we can all begin to apply the rules. So I have no problem with that, but I would have a problem if we now go all over on matters that are before a court which have not been concluded, which actually can go into the merits of that before a court has concluded on them. Because it's good to say that we have privilege. It's another matter to use that privilege to do other things. So let's agree that it will go there, but we will be very quick about it. Members, is there anything else on this item? Aiko. All right. Item 9, further possible rules amendments.
Ma'am, this item relates to, in the main, to member statements and where they are on the agenda of the House. And there have been proposals made previously that the sequence of proceedings need to be rearranged so that member statements are taken maybe before orders of the day. To give effect to that, you would need a rule amendment. Therefore, we recommend that the Review of Rules Committee make a proposal in this regard. That's about the rule amendment. In terms of the guidelines, the time allocation for declarations of vote were not reviewed at the start of the 6th Parliament. And we want to suggest that maybe the committee needs to consider that, whether we stay with what we had in the 5th Parliament in terms of the time allocation to parties. And the second one is the number of ministerial responses to member statements. It has always been 6, and that was not reviewed at the start of the 6th Parliament. We do not know if the honourable members would want to review that, or to keep it at 6, or to make the responses 7. And therefore, we are proposing that there should be proposals in this regard. Thanks.
Can we agree that parties will go and consider and come back to the subcommittee with their proposals as to whether we keep things as they were or whether we want to amend? We are agreed. Medla Kude.
Thanks, Honorable Speaker. We agree just also to add the removal of notices of motion in the House, because when you check, the debates that we have in the House are not coming from those motions. So if we can all go back to our parties and decide whether we want them or not. It's just a proposal. Notices of motions.
Maybe a little discussion on notices of motions and how they are concluded might actually help. My understanding is that you make a notice of a motion. If at the next sitting you do not take up and indicate that that which you have put notice on, you want to now debate, it falls into the history. Thanks,
I'm happy to have the discussion, but I just don't want there to be any impression that there's a tacit agreement, because there's very limited opportunities for members of Parliament to bring their business to the House, and this is one of them. And the motion which we're discussing on the order paper this afternoon was moved in the House last week.
No, the motion, there was a motion in the House, I think from the ANC. I'm not sure how it was processed, because I don't think we got an indication that then the ANC would then continue with that discussion, so that take up the motion in the House on the floor, so that the other parties could then go on. Now, the motion of this afternoon, the discussion this afternoon comes from a specific process which the IFP and the ANC entered on top of that motion which was made on the floor. So there are two processes here which I think we need to then go back to again clean up the space. How do we deal with a notice of a motion which is made at the floor of the House, and how do we do with a motion which comes straight into the Speaker's office in the way of a written note? And I think that maybe that is what we need to go and clean up. Because for me, there were two processes at play here. It wasn't just a carryover from I made a notice on the floor. And you are right, Ntate Steenhuisen, that has always given members a foot into, I am introducing this topic. But the member who introduces the motion must then follow up, or at least make arrangements that in my absence, that motion must be debated. And maybe it is the mechanism of reviving how the notices of motions are then relived into the House that I'm calling for. Just a little bit of cleanup.
Yes, we agree on the cleanup, Honorable Speaker. We might have dragged our feet, but we did write to the Speaker to indicate that we would like to debate that motion, but we were beaten to it by the IFP. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. While we are cleaning up, I would suggest that we also ask parties to make representations to the subcommittee with regard to motions without notice, because the intention of what that is supposed to be and what it has become. And if you look at what happened last week, we really need to revisit the whole idea of motions without notice as well, please.
Yeah, I think we're talking slightly at cross purposes. The motion that I was referring to was the item for discussion by the Honourable G.G. Hill-Lewis, which was a motion moved in the House last week. And my understanding is that you can only bring a motion above the line for discussion if such motion has been moved in the House or complies with a written motion to your office. And that's always been my understanding about how you get an item onto the order paper. But I'm happy to have the discussion about how we streamline the process.
I did indicate that I'm not too well today. My apologies. In my mind, we're discussing the snap debate. So I must apologize for that. Yes, in the name of the whip, Ndati Buteles will lead that snap debate on behalf of the party. We agreed that all these deliberations, cleaning ups, reminders, whatever, must happen at subcommittee point. Yeah, it seems we really have a lot of work for the subcommittee. Honorable members, if there is no other input, we are on the last item. I must bid you goodbye.